As we all wait for the Nintendo Switch 2 announcement, many people, including myself, are hoping to see a new Super Smash Bros. Title on the horizon. There really is no more exciting time to be a gaming fan than during the lead up to a Smash Bros. Game. It's always just fun seeing any information like new characters, new mechanics, or even just seeing how our old mains are changed. However, one of the most tragic things that can happen to you in this period is seeing the character you loved in one Smash title become a shell of their former selves in the next one. I thought it'd be interesting to go back and take a look at some of the most prominent examples of the biggest fall-offs between previous generations of Smash games. At first, I thought it'd be fine to just eyeball test the most prominent examples and talk about why they got so much worse off of my memory. But instead, I think it'd be more fun to try to make an actual ranking of the biggest fall-offs that are more based around their numbers in competitive tier lists. So if you've seen my last few videos about the best and worst characters over the course of Smash history, I'll be using the same formula as last time. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I highly suggest you check them out, as it'll be following a similar formula here. That being said, for this list, we're going to be looking at the differential in a character's rankings between one game where they are presumably ranked pretty well, and the next game they appeared in following it. So, for example, if we wanted to see how Meta Knight fell off after his dominant rank 1 in Brawl, I would have to compare it to Smash 4, not his current place in Smash Ultimate, as we're looking at their immediate next showing. Secondly, if you've seen the last two videos, I'm sure you're familiar with this formula. For anyone who doesn't know, this formula essentially lets us distribute points across the roster in a Smash game and make sure the best character in the game receives 100 and the worst character receives 0. We're going to compare the scores between 2 consecutive games to see which characters had the biggest fall-offs in points in Smash history. We use this formula because being ranked 12th as a raw number does not tell us much. 12th in Smash 64 means you're literally the worst character in the game, whereas 12th in Ultimate means you're one of the most threatening characters in the current meta. So this formula allows us to see how strong a character is relative to the roster size of each game, since the raw number doesn't tell us too much. So if we look at Meta Knight again, who barely didn't make this list, the way we'd find out how big his fall-offs are just as follows. We look at Brawl, where he received 100 points as he was the best character in the game. In Smash 4, where he was ranked 16th out of 54, he receives 71.7 points. This means that he had a fall off of 29.3 points. Not quite enough to make the list. If we check his fall from Smash 4 to now, where he got 39 points, well, that's a massive fall off. If we check off his fall from Smash 4 to Ultimate, where he now has 39.5 points in Ultimate, well, that's a fall off of 32.2, which is also not enough to make this list. However, if we looked at Meta Knight's career as a whole, from his start in Brawl now to Ultimate, well, he had quite a big fall off and he would make this list. However, because most characters don't have a trajectory like Meta Knight, where it's a very linear fall off, I thought it'd be better to look at exact fall-offs from one game to the direct next showing. Especially since we're waiting for a Smash 6, we can look at our current Ultimate mains and hope they do not get the same treatment as some of these characters. So let's talk about some of the biggest fall-offs between games in Smash history, and pray our mains do not get put on this list when Smash 6 comes out. Let me know your guesses on which characters you think will make the top 5. In my last few videos about Smash history, I actually had a blast reading people's guesses before they finished the video and then seeing them reply to their own comment or editing whenever they were totally off. I don't know why, it just always seemed to make me laugh. Also, while you're down there, if you haven't yet, I would really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. I've been trying to put a lot more effort into my videos, and any support I get really does motivate me to keep doing just that and pumping out more content. Anyway, let's get right into it. As usual, before revealing the top 5, let's highlight some of the honorable mentions. We're not going to talk about these in order, but all these characters were either very close to making the list or just kind of surprising in general. First, we have Marth. Marth's placement at the end of most games has actually been pretty good. With a 2nd in Melee, 5th in Brawl, and 11th in Smash 4, this guy really is a huge threat in every game he appeared in for a very long time. Well, at least we get into Smash Ultimate, where he sits at 55th on the current tier list. His current spot in Ultimate only gave him 34.6 points, which is a drop off of 46.5 compared to his Smash 4, where he had 81.1 points. A pretty big drop off, but not at the level of the characters we'll talk about in the top 5. The reason that some people will tell you Marth is bad in Ultimate is actually pretty varied. I tried to do some research for every character that made the list, just to see what other people's thoughts are on the characters now and their last iterations. And for Marth specifically, almost everyone I talked to or thread I looked at on Reddit and whatnot, people seem to give different reasons, or at least weighed each reason differently. Some people think that Ultimate just moves at a much faster pace than Smash 4, which makes Marth's tipper mechanic much harder to make use of. Some people think his combo game was just nerfed a little too hard. In pretty much all the other iterations he's been in, he's had some pretty reliable ways to combo into tippers or just get a lot of damage off some combos. In Smash 4, he had an infamous jab into Imagination, in which his jab 1 let him combo into so many different routes. Many other people, including myself in the last video, think that Marth may not be at his best by no means. He should be a bit higher than he is, but really no one wants to put the work into him. There are so many good sword characters in Smash Ultimate that people who like the archetype of sword characters are probably not going to pick Marth. And the less people developing him, then surely his placing would suffer because of it. But because so few people are trying to push him, He has a 46.5 point drop off, which lands him as an honorable mention. Our next honorable mention is Sheik. Sheik was actually closer to making this list than Marth by a little bit, which surprised me quite a bit actually. But the crazier part is that she actually had 2 noticeable fall offs, which happened in a similar pattern. Her scores across all games are as follows: 5th in Melee, 25th in Brawl. A little bit of a fall off. She then found her fame once more in Smash 4 with a 4th place finish, and then into a 31st in Ultimate. Another little fall off. None of these in particular would make the list, but the fact that she has this repeating pattern of being pretty good and then a pretty decent fall off just kind of seemed funny to me, as it happened twice in a row. With 84 points in Melee, but only 35 in Brawl, she had a fall off of 48.9, which is actually pretty big, but not enough to make the top 5. A lot of people tend to look back on Sheik's Smash history as if she's always just a pretty good character. Although she was nowhere near useless as a character in Brawl, I think it would be a stretch to say that she could hang with the good characters. Going into Smash 4 though, she was one of the best characters in the game for pretty much the entire game's life. Her movement was great, her combos were great, her neutral was great. There was honestly not much more you could ask for. She spent the early days of the game's life behind Diddy as the number 2 character, but then found herself at number 1 after Diddy was nerfed for a bit. After some crazy DLC characters came out with some nerfs to Sheik herself, she ended the game with a great 4th place showing. However, now in Ultimate, she's ranked 31st out of 82, which only gave her 63 points, a fall off of 31. Nowhere near big enough to make the list, but again, it's kind of funny how it happened twice in a row in a very similar pattern. After looking at this pattern, my monkey brain tells me that we can conclude that Sheik will be the 3rd best character in Smash 6, and I'm gonna main her. Let's go over this next one a little quickly because they kind of don't qualify. Well, I'm not sure if they qualify, but I don't know, it doesn't matter because it's an honorable mention anyway. And that's Ice Climbers. They would have not made the top 5 anyway, but the reason they kind of cheated is because their fall off isn't from one game to the immediate next game because they didn't show up in Smash 4. Apparently they were going to show up in Smash 4, but apparently there was some kind of technical issues with the 3DS version of the game and they wanted to make sure they had the same rosters. I'm not sure if this was ever confirmed, but I remember hearing about that a lot. Anyway, since they did not appear in Smash 4, Ultimate was their next showing after their dominant Brawl appearance. This character was strong in both Melee and Brawl for essentially the same reason, which were insanely strong grab combos, even though they do look a little different between the 2 games. And honestly, I think Brawl was like the perfect storm for these 2 characters to succeed. Not only did they have an insane combo game in a game that was generally hard to get long combos for many characters because of low hit stun, the game being played at a slower pace, especially on the ground where a lot of people opted to walk to make sure they didn't trip, just made it incredibly hard to actually keep these 2 away from you and to avoid getting grabbed. In Ultimate, they still actually do have a pretty good punish game, not nearly as good as Brawl, but still pretty good to be honest. But I do think that is much less rare now. Even some of the worst characters in Ultimate can have strong punish games and longer combos, and Ice Climber's combo game is still pretty good, but nowhere near as crazy it was in Brawl. So the Ice Climbers are struggling quite a bit in Ultimate. Another character I want to talk about quickly for the sole reason that it's a little surprising is Villager. Usually when you think of a big fall off, you would imagine the character was so strong that the developers went out of the way to kind of over nerf them and that the character was really bad in the next game. But with Villager, it's a little weird because he wasn't actually that good and he also didn't get changed very much from Smash 4 to Ultimate. That being said, he went from 25th in Smash 4, which gave him 54.72 points, to 72nd in Ultimate, giving him 12.35 points. Fairly large drop off of 42.37. When I looked into it, a lot of people tend to have different reasons for why this fall off happened. I've seen some people say that the engine changed to be more fast paced and made many other characters better against fighting Villager while not actually helping Villager himself too much. I've seen some people say that Renai, who was kind of the person who put Villager on the map in Smash 4, stopped playing, so there's no rep to really show how good he is. And yeah, as I mentioned before, Villager didn't change that much going into Ultimate, but I guess that really could be a bad thing, as the power level on average seemed to go up between Smash 4 and Ultimate, so not changing could actually be a nerf. There doesn't seem to be as obvious reason for this fall off as there were with other characters we've talked about, but it just goes to show you that even if Sakurai doesn't go out of his way to nerf your favorite character right now going into Smash 6, you still need to hope that the system mechanics and the things around your character don't become a struggle for them. And next we have Ganon. He didn't make the cut for top 5, but he was actually pretty close. Honestly, it's similar to Villager's trajectory where he was kind of just like a mid tier and then got way worse. Ganon actually got way worse though, unlike Villager, who we just talked about, who kind of just didn't get better. Ganon, on the other hand, turned into one of the single worst characters in any Smash game ever. Thinking back on it, I can't really tell you a single redeeming quality about Brawl Ganon. I don't want to harp on him too much as I kind of ranted about him in my last video, which you should check out if you haven't. But that being said, Ganon went from 48 points in Melee to literally 0 in Brawl, but luckily for him, a 48 point drop off does not put him in our top 5. Anyway, our last honorable mention, who just barely did not make the cut for top 5, even with a drop off of 63.27 points, which is insane. And that is Mewtwo. Mewtwo actually had one of the biggest glow ups, which now that I'm thinking about it, is maybe another video I could do as a follow up to this to see which characters got the best from one game to another. Anyway, he went from a really bad character in Melee to one of the scariest characters in Smash 4 when we said goodbye to that game. But I guess what comes up must go down. Actually, I guess that's not really true when it comes to Smash. but it was for Mewtwo. Funny enough, I've recently started playing a lot more Smash, and I've been playing Mewtwo a lot in Ultimate. Honestly, mostly because I just think he's fun, but I do have to say I think he is much better than what the tier lists have him now in Ultimate. But maybe that's also for discussion in another video. Either way though, let's talk about why so many people do rate him lowly in Ultimate. Two of the main things you'll often hear about Mewtwo is that he has a large hurt box while being light. These are two pairings that you don't want to see in a Smash game usually. That being said though, other characters have had these traits and been good, like Mewtwo himself in Smash 4 as well as Rosalina. Both characters were really strong in that game while having big hurt boxes and being very light. The thing is, Mewtwo's heavier now in Ultimate than he was back in Smash 4. And back in Smash 4, Rage was a much more prominent factor, so being light was even scarier if you think about it. So there has to be more to it than that. Some people will talk about his tail hurt box, which is another issue you'll hear about a lot. He also did have a bit of a tail hurt box in Smash 4. When looking into it, I found this picture comparing the two hurt boxes between the two games. Mewtwo's tail hurt box did get reduced in one patch for Ultimate, so I'm not exactly sure if this picture on the right represents his tail hurt box post-nerf, or post buff I should say, but it definitely does feel a bit bigger now than it was in Smash 4 for sure. But either way, I do think that is a primary reason he feels bad to play sometimes. Mewtwo also struggles a bit from the game mechanics in my opinion. He was able to abuse the air dodge mechanics in Smash 4, which made him actually decently hard to pin down. Going from that to having a not so great air dodge in Ultimate definitely hurts him, especially in his disadvantaged state. One really cool thing he could do in Smash 4 was a Nair to footstool into down B combo, which could just kill or do a lot of damage. That being said, he still does have footstool down B combos, just not out of Nair itself. As I mentioned earlier though, he is a bit heavier now. His Shadow Ball is just insane now. He still has some of those footstool disable combos, even off Shadow Ball itself, funny enough. But the Nair one was definitely the most practical. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, when it comes to this one, I just straight up don't agree with his placement. I don't think Mewtwo is some top tier threat anymore, but I think he is pretty significantly better than his current placement on the list, and I'm gonna keep playing and learning him until Smash 6 comes out, to be honest, just for fun. Luckily for me though, the GOAT seems to agree, so I have some faith in Mewtwo.
Mewtwo I think is very underrated. I don't know what you think.
I do agree with Mewtwo being underrated.
You think he's like bottom of high tier?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Could be even better.
And with that, let's move on to talk about the 5 greatest fall-offs in Smash. At number 5, we have King DDD with a massive fall-off of 64.61 points between Brawl and Smash 4. And honestly, I'm not sure if he's going to have a comeback anytime soon, as he's just been struggling ever since. There is a real chance that DDD may have continued to drop in Brawl had the meta developed even further. If we take a look at his history throughout Brawl, he actually started the game ranked incredibly highly. I think this was mostly because his strengths are painfully obvious and easy to execute, plus he was heavy, so it just made him a little harder to kill, similar to Snake. If you were not on point, these characters would just live forever. But yeah, having an amazing and quick back air on a floaty character with multiple jumps, well, we've seen that before. He also had an easy to do chain grab that worked on so many characters, so picking up this character early into Brawl just felt really good and felt like you had a lot of power right out the gate. As we can see here though, he was ranked 3rd on the first Smash Backroom tier list. If we go over his history though, he quite literally just trends down throughout the game's life. He went from 3rd to 4th to 6th to 8th to 10th to 11th and now sits at 12th. It's actually kind of insane how consistent and smooth his way down was the tier list. Either way, in my opinion, he was a good character and incredibly fun to play. That being said, he's been struggling ever since. He did lose his chain grab, which you can't really consider a massive nerf for him, as chain grabs have kind of died after Brawl, but it definitely did hurt him. The biggest change in my opinion was his back air change. Although changing one move may not seem like a big deal, when the move was so good and allowed the character to be so threatening with his back turned to you at a range that's usually not too threatening to see him at, and you can just try to whip punch him instead. Especially if you're going to remove it for another slow big move like his fair kind of does, except when his back is faced to you. It just kind of makes him easier to whiff punish and wall out, and you don't feel as threatened. I feel like he's turned into a much more typical heavyweight character that you expect to see in Smash. He's slow, he hits hard, and just doesn't feel as threatening anymore if you just wait for him to whiff. I feel like he used to be much more active, he would take to the air, and he just felt more threatening. That being said, it feels like they've tried to put more power into his projectile, but I think there's a lot of work to be done with this character if he ever wants to recover from such a big fall off. Anyway, let's talk about our number 4 character, who is Falco. Now, if you only play Melee, you may think this fall off comes after his amazing showing in Melee, but it's actually not the case. Even though Falco was changed so much from Melee to Brawl in kind of an attempt to de-clone him from Fox and make him more of a unique character, if only another character could have also got this treatment, he actually remained an amazing character in Brawl. His fall off comes after that, going from 83.8 points in Brawl with a 7th place finish to a measly 15.1 points with his abysmal showing of 46th out of Smash 4's 54 character roster, a massive drop off of 68.7 points. Falco had a lot going for him in Brawl. He had an amazing chain grab, which often left him in an amazing position to steal stocks after it ended or just push his advantage. He could cancel the end lag of his laser as he landed, allowing him to do double lasers for zoning and single lasers for approaching, or just using them while he's in advantage. He had a great combo game and is one of the best users of the famous Brawl tech Dacus or dash attack cancelled up smash. I think Brawl gets a bad rep when people look back at it for some of the system mechanics, and honestly, deservedly so. But many people who actually did play Brawl can vouch for this. In terms of just raw feel of the characters and how satisfying some of the individual character kits and character specific tech was, Brawl was actually an absolute blast. I mentioned this in past videos that I think Brawl Diddy and Brawl Marth were two of my most favorite characters of all time, and Brawl Falco's up there too, honestly. He just felt good. Either way, after what seemed to be a great semi-redesign for the character with his Brawl appearance, he has been struggling ever since. His fall off in Smash 4 was a massive one, and if I'm being 100% honest with you, even after playing and watching Smash 4 competitively for so many years, I cannot tell you what Smash 4 Falco was supposed to do. He didn't have this insane combo game that he has now in Ultimate, but he also lost a lot of his tech, like his chain grab, his lasers, no more Dacus obviously. I feel like he just felt sluggish and had no real direction in what his kit was supposed to do. As someone who tried to play Falco early into Smash 4, I think it took me less than 5 minutes to realize the guy I found so fun in Brawl was not in there anymore. I don't know why he was changed so much in Smash 4. I honestly thought design-wise he was pretty cool in Brawl. Obviously they could tone a few things down that were a little annoying if they wanted, but I guess instead they just decided to make everything feel bad instead. Either way, Brawl Falco ends up at number 4 on our list. And coming in at number 3, we have Captain Falcon. In my video about the best characters of all time, many people in the comments had guessed that Falcon would score very highly, as a lot of people remember him being at least pretty good in every game, if not great in some of the others. However, I think a lot of people, for good reason, have erased Brawl Falcon from their memories. After scoring 80 points in Melee, he fell down to 10.81 in Brawl with his 34th place finish, a drop off of 69.19. Everyone knows about Melee Falcon. He hits hard, he's fast, he tech chases you, he stomps you, he knees you. He's been a fan favorite character to watch for a really long time. He's satisfying, he has a lot of satisfying hard hits, he moves quick, and he also doesn't have a great disadvantage, so his opponent might kill him very early too. Easy to see why this character is fun to watch. Brawl Falcon, on the other hand, I'm not exactly sure what your win condition was with this character. I think the Brawl engine itself was just a giant nerf to Falcon. As a game, Brawl was generally floatier with less hits done across the board, making it hard to do some of the traditional combos you'd see with Falcon do in many other games. The game also had the worst mechanic in Smash history, tripping. Earlier I talked about how the hate for this mechanic is just because, let's face it, it does nothing of value for anyone trying to take the game competitively, but a lot of great characters could actually play around tripping very well. Maybe they would walk more or they would just take to the sky. For Falcon though, in pretty much every iteration he's in, he's usually a character who loves to abuse his very bursty ground speed, so the mechanic nerfed him harder than most in my opinion. There were also nerfs on some of his iconic moves like knee. Not only is it way harder to combo into because it's Brawl, the sweet spot had such a small hitbox. With the character losing a lot of his best tools while also being kind of nerfed by the game's engine even more, it's not that surprising that he had such a crazy fall off and put him at number 3 on this list. Coming in at number 2, we have Melee Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff's third place spot in Melee landed her at 92 points, but going from 3rd to 3rd last is an insane fall off. Being 36 out of 38 in Brawl gave her a score of 5.41 points, a fall off of 86.59, pretty insane honestly. Melee Jigs is kind of a glass cannon. She can get really early stocks with her amazing edge guarding or her rest combos, or she just generally gets a lot of damage with some of her air combos. Her neutral was pretty good too, with insane airspeed, a back air that you would think was actually a sword and not a leg. She does so many things well in Melee. Coming into Brawl though, she lost much of what made her a cannon, but was still very much a glass to be honest. Besides some nerfs to the character herself, not allowing her to get consistent rest combos, as well as just feeling a little stubbier and slower in the air, in my opinion she also struggled from game mechanics too. Unlike Falcon, who I mentioned was hurt from tripping the most, Jigs did not care that much as she took to the air. I actually think one of the things that nerfed Jigs after Melee was that recovery seemed to kind of get better across the board, and especially from Smash 4 onwards, it was harder to just edge guard people. Edge guarding people is such a pivotal part of Melee, and Jigs is not only good at doing it, but it's hard to do it to her. So it's not surprising that a trait like that would make her very good in Melee. After Melee, however, getting stocks with edge guarding has become less and less stressed as a way to get a stock. Of course, not that it doesn't still exist, it's just not as big a priority. I do think she faced a similar issue to Falcon in that not only did she receive a lot of nerfs to herself, the direction of the next game didn't favor her all that much either. Especially because she was less fast and a little stubbier as we mentioned. There were so many good characters with large disjoints or just insane walling or just, Meta Knight being Meta Knight. It made it very difficult for Jigs to find good spots to land hits against some of the best characters in the game. Either way, that makes Jigglypuff a runner-up to having the largest fall off in Smash history. And coming in at number 1, this guy had such a large fall off that he has been unable to pick his feet up off the ground for over 20 years afterwards. We have Smash 64 Kirby. As many of you may know, Kirby is an absolute demon in Smash 64. His second place finish gave him 90.91 points. However, I guess Sakurai does not like to see his own character succeed because just like with DDD, immediately after Kirby's debut, he fell down to 25th in Melee. It's actually insanely funny how similar Kirby and Jigs are in this regard. Jigs went from 3rd best to 3rd last, and Kirby went from 2nd best to 2nd last, and both of them have had a hard time finding their way back up the tier list ever since, but they have been working at it slowly to be honest. If I'm being 100% honest, I did not play Kirby in Smash 64 or Melee, so I had to see what others had to say about this. And from what I could tell, next to everything about the character was nerfed going into Melee. Kirby in Smash 64 was pretty fast, had an insane combo game and surprisingly good range, especially on his back air and his up tilt. Honestly, just looking at these pictures, those look like swords and not feet. Also, like I mentioned earlier with Jigs in some of the older games, it's kind of worth its weight in gold if you're a hard character to edgeguard. And in Smash 64, Kirby had multiple jumps and much better airspeed than he does now. Going into Melee, Kirby lost next to everything that was good about him. He felt slower, his hurt boxes were not as crazy as they used to be. I've heard he has no useful throws in a game where chain grabs, tech chases, and kill combos off of throw are kind of the norm. Basically everything was toned down and we were left with a character that is stubby, relatively slow, and not particularly good at comboing or taking stocks. It's pretty insane to think about how big of a fall off this is. As I mentioned, Kirby never really recovered from this. He remained pretty bad at every game going forward. He managed to be just okay in Brawl, being 20th. Looking back at it, Brawl seems to be the game where Sakurai's characters really got to shine. But besides that, Kirby has been hugging the bottom tiers. While researching for this video, I've seen people say that they think Sakurai is scared to buff Kirby too much because of what happened in 64, which is kind of funny if you think about it. If you've seen my other video about the best characters in Smash history, which you can check out here, you'll know that Sakurai doesn't seem to have a problem making characters top tier for multiple games in a row. It's funny how none of his own characters get that treatment though. Kirby and DDD were both on this list and Meta Knight wasn't all that far off. Anyway, that's the list. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see similar videos about the history of Smash, any fighting games, or anything even remotely related, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. I would appreciate any likes on the videos as it really does help the channel out. Have a great day everyone and stay beautiful, my friends.